Papamas Gamganakasqueo, Nitsigasun, Otsinia, Michel First Nation, Nia Haudenosaunee, Nehiawisqueo. Greetings, Chief. My name is Jodi Calahoo Stonehouse. I'm from the Michel First Nation in Treaty 6 territory here in Alberta. I want to give thanks to Creator for this day. I want to thank the Elder for opening us up in a good way and for the drums and the beautiful songs. I give thanks for each of you, Chiefs, and to all the Chiefs who attended our Zoom meetings, our forums, our phone calls, and for those of you who made time to give me advice. I listened to your suggestions and I heard you. Thank you. And to those Chiefs I have not met yet, I look forward to meeting you and spending time in your territories. I give thanks to the elders and the knowledge keepers who have guided me on this journey. And I give thanks for having had the privilege to sit with my fellow candidates who have demonstrated integrity, devotion, and leadership throughout this entire campaign. I have learned many things from each of them, and I thank you. My prayers and my heart go out to our nations as we are currently battling wildfires. We are in a state of emergency at the national level, and it is our responsibility to ensure that emergency operation plans are supported and that we are advocating for your needs. We have heard that an entire town has been wiped out. We must collectively come together as nations to support the rebuilding of their lands, of their nations. We are in unprecedented times. We must do things differently than we have ever done before. Now more than ever, we need strong, competent leadership. We need a comprehensive plan to organize, strategize, and mobilize all possible supports and services necessary to uplift and support our chiefs in assembly in turn so they are able to support their nation's citizens during times of crisis like the ones we are seeing. We are collectively feeling a deep sadness. A deep wound has been exposed by the finding of the bodies of our relatives that never made it home from the Indian residential schools. The finding of our children, of our relatives, have brought to surface the genocide that our peoples has endured over decades, and it has reminded us of the negligence of the testimonies of our survivors and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Chiefs, I want to acknowledge that you have the hardest job in this country. You are leading a group of peoples coming out of genocide who are continuously re-victimized and re-traumatized. At the Assembly, we must support you. We must have multiple approaches to do this. Firstly, we have to ensure that chiefs have access to tools, resources, ceremonial support, prayer support, and all methods possible to help lift our people and our survivors and our intergenerational survivors as we heal. Secondly, at the national office, we must support the resolution and organize a legal framework on positions so that you can move forward in your claims around crimes against humanity, apartheid, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, violations on human rights, and the International Criminal Court. We have a small moment in time to take action, chiefs. Our role at the national office is to ensure that you have all the legal possibilities presented to you so that you may collectively or individually move forward in taking action. The state and the church will be held accountable to this abhorrent treatment of our people. I want to say hi to Cook B. Casimir and Cook B. Wilson for bringing forward this resolution today, and to all the chiefs for their amendments. The good words were shared, and so was clear instruction. We are a beautiful, strong, kind, and loving people. We will heal, and we will ensure that we see justice for our loved ones at the national and the international level. At the Assembly, we must also prepare frameworks for regional and local accountability to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. This is also imperative work we must do together. The global pandemic has also had many devastating impacts in our communities due to overcrowded houses, health disparities, and our people, 51 nations, have boil water advisories, lack of access to clean drinking water. I spoke with chiefs who have up to 15 people living in an individual home. Outbreaks of bed bugs, Some of our communities are like third world conditions. This is shameful in a country that is one of the most richest countries in the world. We don't know if this pandemic will end, and we don't know if similar ones are to come. But we do know how to best protect our communities and how to keep ourselves as safe as possible. We have witnessed that there are global food systems that are very fragile, including our own. At the national level, we must prepare a strategy how we might create a seed bank of non-GMO seeds, as many of our nations have begun across the country. We must share these seeds, this knowledge of growing our own food and drawing on our ancestral knowledge systems. We must take action, and we must work together to ensure we are prepared. Climate change, as we know, is impacting our people as we are out on the lands and we see it with our own eyes. Therefore, it's impacting our inherent and treaty rights. We must prepare a strategy to protect them collectively and individually. We know that we are part of the solution, having been experts on this land since time immemorial. We must ensure that we have plans about kinds of economic developments that take place on our lands. We must move towards responsible and sustainable development. We must lead the way in shifting towards a greener economy and hold the Canadian state and industry to the same standards that we want to see in our territories. We must have a plan to help First Nations think through the transition towards a post-carbon future. We must invest and commit in renewable energy that is viable for our nations. More recently, Bill C-12 was passed to Royal Ascension, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. What is our position on this piece of legislation? What is the Chiefs and Assembly's position? Last December, the Government of Canada launched consultations on the new water agency to ensure clean, reliable fresh water to Canadians and the Canadian economy. Have our Chiefs and Assembly been consulted by the Canadian state? Do we have a national collective position on the matters that we need to be consulted on as a priority? We must supersede all other consultations in this country. We have a right to our own water that must be recognized. It is imperative at the national office that we prepare all the research, the data, and the potential positions that you and the Chief and Assemblies can choose to make the best decisions possible in the coming issues that face your nation. As the national chief, I will be a strong and unifying force, amplifying your voices on all of the issues that are important to our people and bringing us together to do the work that is expected of us as leaders. I will work with you to empower our sovereign nationhood, and together we will return the AFN to serving the original vision the Chiefs had when they founded our organization. As National Chief, I will make sure that the Assembly of First Nations serves its intended functions to create solidarity and cooperation among First Nations across this country. Advocate and defend our inherent and treaty rights as First Peoples on Turtle Island. Additionally, it is imperative that the Assembly of First Nations brings accountability, transparency, and good governance to all our operations. We must envision innovative strategies to accomplish our common goals. Data sovereignty and a digital plan is imperative. However, we must also focus on our energy on how we can support our remote communities with infrastructure, ensuring that no nation is left behind. Communication is critical now more than ever, and we can do this effectively and efficiently by building our own data sovereignty. Our internal resolution process needs some update and some love. We need a tool that demonstrates the issue in the resolution, where there are alignments with other resolutions that have come forward, what movement has been made on that resolution, were discussions had with ministers, was there funding allocated to that nation and or to the Assembly? Was the resolution resolved, and what are the next steps? You need to be able to see this resolution data on screen in real time. We must also evaluate our outcomes, both successful and unsuccessful resolutions. That way, the chiefs in assembly know what are the lessons learned, what needs to be improved, and what are our next steps. Why am I here? When I was 15 years old, I had a dream, and I went and told my grade 8 social studies class that I would be the first woman to be the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And the kids laughed at me, so I never forgot my dream. And I started working towards it ever since. My chop-on was Jodi Calahoo. He was part of the League of Indians, which then became the Indian Association of Alberta. And I have his papers, his documentation, as he wrote about why he and his colleagues at the time, other chiefs, would illegally take the train to Ottawa because of the treatment that they were, at this time, they were starving. They were having difficult times with the settlers in this territory, and they were taking the train to make a difference. We need to make sure that our grandchildren don't have to fight the same fight that we are as our grandparents. We need to see systemic change. We need to make a difference. My reserve, they found gravel. We are located next to a major city, and they discovered gravel in 1958. And they essentially starved the Indians off the land, which meant we were dispossessed of our lands. I grew up attending meetings with my grandfather, my mother, and going to Indian claims commissions, court proceedings, and never did my elders ever see any sort of reconciliation. We grew up without a land. I want to ensure that no First Nations young person never has a community to go home to. We must work together to ensure that our lands, our rights, our water, and our people are protected. I do not take this decision lightly. I have been preparing myself for a very long time. I started a post-secondary journey. I did a BA in Native Studies, went on to study a master's in science, and looked at contamination of water downstream from the Alberta oil sands. I also studied social innovation, which is a way of solving complex problems. You see, they say there are 3 kinds of problems: a simple problem, a complicated problem, and a complex problem. A simple problem is baking a cake. We can all have the ingredients, a stove, and make something that relatively looks like a cake. A complicated problem is going to the moon. If we have the engineers, the tools, everything we need, we can get to the moon. A complex problem is coming out of genocide and trying to bring our children home. We are interwoven into a web of systems such as there. I learned about the systems of bureaucracy and how we can use those systems to utilize our own systems and lift our own systems for accountability and transparency. I worked with international Indigenous peoples as we brought the World Indigenous Nations Games to Edmonton, Alberta, with former Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner, Chief Wilton Littlechild. We had to organize how to get seeds, feathers, sacred items from all over the world here in Edmonton. More recently, I've been a commissioner with the Edmonton Police Commission. I felt it was important to study the system of policing. As we see the devolution of authority coming from the Canadian state and then allocate power and jurisdiction to the provinces, we must be prepared to take on the authority and jurisdiction of policing. We must have strategies for peacekeeping in our nations and build capacity. This is important work that lies ahead. I also did work in film and TV, Miyo-Pimatisiwin Productions. We won multiple awards in Sydney, Australia, as well as down in the States, Washington, DC, for our films on reconciliation and our films on the 60s scoop. I'm currently the executive director of Yellowhead Indigenous Education Foundation, where we are building an Indigenous Innovation Lab at Yellowhead Tribal College. And we are also building land-based, language-based curriculum in our nations. all the major work that I've done in my institutions, all the work I've done at grassroots levels, advocating for our homeless, working with our young women and young men, getting them off the streets, all my time spent in ceremony with elders, all the times I've been blessed to travel to remote communities and be on the land harvesting, has provided me with the skill set necessary to support you best as National Chief. Our languages, our cultures, our ceremonies, our land-based practices have ensured the survival of our nations over the generations. Our people have faced many challenges in the long history of this land, and we have survived and thrived by listening to the wisdom of our ancestors and using our own intelligence to innovate and adapt to changing times and to the new realities of the day. Our ancestors gave us the cultural and the spiritual tools we need to survive, and more than that, to take our rightful place as First Nations in this country. In our recovery for the latest challenges that we are facing, we must lift our pipes, we must sing our songs, we must dance our dances, and pray in the ways that Creator has gifted us. And then we have to put in the work as human beings who love our nations and who care about the future generations who are yet to rise from the earth. And we must strengthen ourselves and make a better future for our nations. It is time for us to be innovative, resourceful, and proactive. We are at a moment in time where it is crucial that we work together and lift each other up as we begin a new phase in our nations with hope, with love, with compassion, with kindness, and with love at the forefront. The seeds, chiefs, that we plant today are for the next 7 generations. So let's plant them wisely. Nyawagoa, hai hai, nanaskaman.